Morning, everybody. Morning, good to see you guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out with us. It is Christmas, like Lauren said, and Christmas means all kinds of cool decorations, all kinds of stuff out all over the place. You may have seen when you came in, all the stuff in the middle of the lobby there. That's all for Secor's Christmas thing. So a lot of the presents that a lot of you bought to kind of give that away, that's what all that's gonna be. They're gonna be doing that this week, so thank you for that. And church isn't the only place with decorations. Your house probably is decorations. Your neighborhood probably has all these decorations. One of the things that's always been interesting to me about Christmas decorations is one of the most common Christmas decorations that you'll have nativity scenes. All right, see, nativity is the fancy word for the birth of Jesus. But you'll have nativity scenes. A lot of people have nativity scenes. Some people put them in their front yard. A lot of people have them throughout their house. Me and my house, we have a bunch of nativity scenes that we've just kind of collected over the years from different places. We have little ornaments that'll have nativity scenes. We have them set up. And the thing that's always fascinating to me about nativity scenes is they're always presented as such like peaceful, mellow things. Like this is just a picture, this is not a nativity set that I have, but this is just one I found online, that this is what most nativity sets look like. That you have the core elements of the Christmas story. You have the main characters, you have Mary and Joseph, and you have baby Jesus, and then you have shepherds, and you have wise men, and these are all the characters that we're told about in the Christmas story in the New Testament. But when you put them together in a nativity scene, it just looks so calm. And sometimes there's like an angel sitting on top of the little manger and it looks so peaceful. And when we see nativities, we sing like Silent Night or, Oh Holy Night or like Little Town of Bethlehem, these songs that are about just like peace and tranquility. And the reason why I think that's funny is if you actually read the account of the events leading up to the birth of Jesus and the birth of Jesus and then even a little bit after the birth of Jesus in the New Testament, it is completely chaotic. Like completely chaotic. Like I honestly think, I'm gonna put up another picture. This is how really the birth of Jesus, the nativity is more described if you actually read it. This is kind of more like what it feels like. Like I said, I got this one offline too. I have no idea who put this together, but this is awesome because you have like a Ghostbuster guy there in the corner. Wally is holding the Ark of the Covenant. There's Big Bird, Splinter from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I don't know why the dinosaur is attacking that bird from McDonald's, but this is like the feel of what is actually happening at the birth of Jesus. That is completely chaotic, it's completely a mess, it's crazy, but in the middle of it, there's something beautiful that's happening. And so what we want to do this Christmas over the next couple weeks as we kind of lead in, and then we're gonna, kind of really hit it on Christmas Eve, is we want to look at like the themes that kind of go together to make up the story of the birth of Jesus. Because in the New Testament, there's 4 books that we call Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 4 different accounts of the life of Jesus. Really, there's only 2 of them that talk to us about the birth of Jesus, and that's Matthew and Luke. And Matthew and Luke each give us different parts of that birth of Jesus story. They don't both tell us the exact same thing. One of them tells us about the wise men or the magi. One talks about the shepherds. And really what they're doing when Matthew and Luke tell us the story of the birth of Jesus, they're wanting us to know something about not just Jesus' birth, but about his whole life. That what's happening in his birth is really telling us more about who he is and what he's going to do and who he's going to become. And so what we want to do again throughout this series is we want to look at what are these themes? Why do Matthew and Luke include some of the details they include? Because they're intentional about what they include. And what is it specifically they're trying to tell us about Jesus and who Jesus is going to become? And so today we're going to start by looking at something that Matthew writes in his gospel. And Matthew writes us, it's not just something that Matthew writes, it's actually a quote. And here's what Matthew says in Matthew 1, verses 22 through 23. He says, "All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Immanuel," which means God with us. So as Matthew is telling us the story of the birth of Jesus, there comes this point where he quotes, and notice, he doesn't even say exactly who, he just says, hey, remember what the prophet said. And so the fact that he doesn't even name the prophet, the assumption is that the audience that he's writing to, they're gonna know exactly who he's talking about. Matthew is writing his gospel to a Jewish audience. A Jewish audience whose history was rooted in what you and I call the Old Testament, the scriptures of Israel, the Hebrew Bibles, the story of Israel. So this is something that's commonly known even in the first century Jewish world. So it's like when Matthew says this, he doesn't have to quote who it is. He doesn't have to give it context. The people that he's talking to know. And he says, oh yeah, this is the prophet said, and people are like, oh yeah, I know that story. And the reason that Matthew quotes this story is because he's wanting his Jewish audience to understand something really significant about what's happening in the birth of Jesus. He wants them to kind of make this connection that for them would be a historical connection, but it would also in a lot of ways be a very emotional connection. And so to understand what it is that Matthew's actually saying, you and I, because most of us don't come from a Jewish context, we're not as familiar with the Old Testament story as first century Jews would have been, we have to go back and look at who exactly is he quoting and what's going on. Now, before we get back to reading, who he's quoting from, by the way, is Isaiah. We're gonna look at Isaiah in a second. But before we get back to reading Isaiah, I want us to understand something about the way that the New Testament will quote the Old Testament, specifically the way New Testament authors will quote Old Testament prophets. When we think of prophets and prophecy, we tend to think of like Nostradamus. Like I'm gonna predict that this is going to happen, that this event is going to happen, or this team's gonna win the championship or whatever. That's how we think of it. Prophecy in Israel, prophet literally means spokesperson. And they were people who spoke on behalf of God to Israel. Most of it is not prediction at all. It would be more like what we would call preaching. Like, hey, here's what's going on. Here's like calling people to God, calling people back to God, calling the nation of Israel back to God. Now, when the New Testament writers will quote from the Old Testament prophets, they'll use it in different ways, but there's two major ways they'll quote prophets. And those are direct fulfillment and typological fulfillment. And those may sound like big, you don't really have to remember it. The important thing is this, direct fulfillment is exactly like it sounds. Like that's what we're talking about, the whole Nostradamus thing. Like there are times the New Testament writers will say, this particular prophet said this, and it came true. That does happen. But most of the time that the New Testament writers quote the Old Testament prophets, it's what scholars refer to as typological, which means it's not a direct fulfillment, but it is a comparison. It's basically saying, hey, this is like this. Not necessarily that when Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel or whatever, when they were talking about this, they were predicting this, but what they were saying and doing and what was happening here is of the same type and theme of what's happening here, which, as we're gonna see, is exactly what Matthew's doing when he quotes Isaiah. Matthew's not saying that when Isaiah said this, that he was predicting this, but what Matthew's doing, and this is the point he's trying to make with his first century Jewish audience, is what's happening here is just like what's happening here. And what Matthew wants us to do is to compare these two things. And so we have to go back and see what's happening in the passage in Isaiah that Matthew quotes from. And to understand it, you have to understand the social context and the reality of what's happening. It's a quote that comes out of Isaiah chapter 7. And the background of Isaiah chapter 7 is what we call the Syro-Ephraimitic War. And what it is here's a map of, we call it the Middle East. When you go throughout history, they call it the ancient Near East. But what's happening during the lifetime of Isaiah in the ancient Near East is you have Assyria up north, and Assyria is the powerhouse. They are the dominant empire. They kind of rule over everything. But then you have Israel and Syria. Sometimes it's called Aram. If you see Aram in the Old Testament, Aram and Syria are the same place. Aram's the ancient name for it. Syria is what we currently call it. The two kings of Syria and Israel are tired of basically bowing down to the demands of Assyria, and so they want to lead a revolt. They want to fight back. But they know they need more help, so those two kings are pressuring the king of Judah, a guy by the name of Ahaz, and trying to force him to join their coalition to fight against Assyria. And they're using military pressure and all this kind of stuff to like starve him out. They're laying siege, surrounding the city. They're not just like kind of like verbally pressuring him. They're applying like military tactics to try to force them. So Ahaz now finds himself in this really uncomfortable situation where he knows it's a lose-lose situation. Because if he goes against Assyria, even if he joins the two kings to the north, they're gonna get destroyed. But he also knows he can't keep holding out against the pressure of Syria and Israel. That eventually they're gonna topple him and they'll just replace him with a king who will do what they want him to do. So Ahaz now finds himself in this no-win situation, this no-win scenario, and we're told that he is scared and Ahaz and his people are shaking like trees in the wind. That's the word that's used to describe them. Like they're in this place, they don't know where to go, they don't know what to do, and they're shaking like trees in the wind because they're so afraid. Have you ever been so afraid of something that you're physically shaking? When I first became a youth minister, we used to take this trip. The junior high group from the church I was at used to take this trip. It was a 2-day trip. We would drive up north of Los Angeles. I lived in Southern California, and we'd spend 2 days at Six Flags Magic Mountain, which Southern California has a lot of amusement parks. You have like Disneyland and all that stuff. But Six Flags Magic Mountain, there's Six Flags like all over the place. Six Flags is where you go like when you want intense rides. Like when you want, hey, we want this to like go in like 57 different loops so we all throw up when the ride's over. Like that was, and so we'd take junior hires up there and we'd go for 2 days and we'd spend the night at this little church that was there. And it was fun. But you have to know that like growing up, heights, like I just did not do heights. I was petrified of heights. I did not do big roller coasters at all. But I'm the new youth minister and I'm taking the junior high group and like I want all the junior hires to think that I'm super cool. Like I don't want them to be like, oh great, our new youth minister, he's just a scaredy cat. So we get to Magic Mountain and I'm like pumped up. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. And I'm with this group of students and they're like, hey, let's go on Viper. Now here's a picture of Viper, just so you can kind of see what Viper looks like. It is, I've been told too that this ride also exists at other Six Flags parks. It's called X2 somewhere. But anyway, the point is, it is a gnarly ride. And this is like the first thing they want to go on. And they're like, let's go on Viper. And they look at me, they're like, Scott, you want to go on Viper? And I'm like, yeah, of course I do. I love Viper. Like, this is my dream. And so we get in line and we stand in line for Viper. And I am trying to hide the fact that my legs are literally shaking. Like I am petrified. And then, this is not a joke. We get to the front, we wait, and we get to the front, and the car pulls up, and all the people get out, and we're about ready to get in, and they're like, no, you can't get in this one. And we're like, why not? They're like, yeah, someone threw up in the last group, and so we have to rinse it out and then send it through so it all like clears out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're gonna die. And then the thing goes through, and the next one comes, and we get in, and the harness comes down over us, and at this point, there's no way I'm not having a heart attack. I can feel my chest, and I am like visibly shaking, but I'm hiding it under this like macho bravado. Yeah, let's do this, let's go. But I was petrified, like literally just shaking. Like I was holding on to these handlebars because I didn't want everyone to see how scared I was. I did go on it, went on everything else there, and it was a lot of fun. But sometimes we get so scared that we shake. This is where Ahaz and all of Judah are at this point. Getting scared of roller coasters is one thing. Maybe you've been scared of roller coasters or rides, or you've gone on like bungee jumps or swings or things like that. But there are a lot of more other serious things that make us afraid, aren't they? News we're afraid of getting, appointments we have, things that we're worried about the future, that we get so afraid that like it literally affects us physically. Fear in and of itself is not a horrible thing. It's a survival response. Like if you see a bear, you're supposed to get afraid, so you go away, so you live. But when fear begins to control our actions, that's when it becomes real destructive. Ahaz and his people are so afraid because of the situation that they're in, this no-win situation, that they are literally shaking. This now is where Isaiah, the prophet, comes out to Ahaz. And Ahaz at this point is hiding water, which seems weird, but what he's doing is he's preparing for another siege. Because he knows Syria and Israel are gonna come back, they're gonna surround our city. Lay siege is you surround a city and cut off all supplies in and out of the city and basically try to starve the people out. And so he's preparing, storing water so that when they come back, hey, hopefully we'll have some water and we can outlast it. And he's still scared to the point that he's shaking. So Isaiah comes up, and Isaiah tells him like, hey, Ahaz, you just need to relax. I know that you're scared. I know that you're afraid. You don't need to be. What you're afraid of is not going to happen. Like these two guys, they're not going to conquer you. So don't do anything. That's literally Isaiah's advice. Isaiah's advice is don't do anything. I know isn't that the hardest thing to do sometimes? Like, hey, just wait. We do not wait very well as people. Patience is typically for most of us not our strength. But that's what Isaiah tells us, just wait. Just wait. God is going to take care of you. God is going to deliver you. So you need to just wait. And then Isaiah does something that's really kind of like obscure. Isaiah looks at Ahaz and says, I know what I'm asking you to do is a difficult thing. I know you're really scared. I know you're really stressed out. So do this. Ask God for a sign and he will give you a sign. Now, typically, if you read through the rest of the Old Testament, that's like really looked down upon. Like if you just don't trust God, if you're like, God will do what you say, but you have to give me a sign, that's usually looked down as like, oh, well, you don't have enough faith or whatever. But in this case, God, through Isaiah, offers it as a recognition of, hey, I get you're in a tight spot. I get what I'm asking you to do is real difficult, so I'm gonna help you out. So this is not here Ahaz like testing God. This is God saying, I get where you're at, so I'm gonna help you out and I'm gonna throw you a bone here. So just ask for anything and I'll do it and that will be proof to you. But Ahaz refuses. Ahaz like, no, I'm not doing that. And it seems like, if you just read it, it seems like Ahaz's refusal is out of like faith. Like he's like, no, I would never test God. But Ahaz's refusal is actually out of his own fear. Again, he's still afraid. He's shaking. So Isaiah then gets frustrated with Ahaz. And this is what Isaiah says in response to Ahaz. Isaiah 7, verse 14 through 16. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. So when you read this, picture this kind of in frustration and anger, because this is where Isaiah's at. Isaiah's like, God just offered to do something for you and you rejected it out of your own fear. God's gonna give you a sign anyway, dummy. And here it is. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and she will call him Immanuel, which means God with us. He will be eating curds and honey, and when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, for before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid to waste. And so Isaiah tells him, here's the sign anyway. The sign is this young woman's going to have a baby, and by the time that baby's old enough to pick the food they want to eat. You know, when babies are real little, they just eat whatever we give them. But there comes a point where it's like, no, I don't want green beans, I just want apples or pears or whatever. By the time this baby's old enough to choose what they want to eat, this whole situation is gone. Like it'll resolve itself. You don't have to do anything. And so this baby is going to be the sign to you. And I'm even gonna give you the timeline, dude. By the time this baby's old enough, this will all be gone. So now Ahaz has a choice. Where am I gonna put my trust? Where am I gonna put my confidence? Where am I gonna put my hope? God, through his prophet, Isaiah, has said he's going to do this. And he's given me this sign that he is with me. That in the midst of this moment where I'm scared to death, my people are scared to death, we're literally physically shaking because we're so scared of the situation we find ourselves in, that God has said he's going to do this. I can either trust in that, or I can find something else to trust in. And what Ahaz chooses to do is to find something else to trust in. And interestingly, what he trusts in is a political alliance. That he runs off to Assyria. Remember, Assyria is the big bad powerhouse. He runs off to Assyria and basically tattles on Syria and Israel. And says, hey, these guys, my neighbors to the north, my friends here, they're plotting against you. They're gonna lead a revolt against you. I'm here as your good loyal subject, so will you take care of them and will you help me out? Assyria then marches down in, wipes out Syria, wipes out Israel, but they don't stop there. They march down into Judah and take control of Judah. They do not conquer Judah. They do not take Ahaz off the throne, but they take control of Judah. Judah will survive as a nation for about another 150 years before they're eventually conquered. But Judah as a nation will never recover from that moment. They will never be independent again. They will never be a self-governing entity. From that point on, they will always be subject to someone. Someone is always oppressing them. Someone is always calling the shots. And really, if you want to trace Judah's downfall back, you trace it back to Ahaz in Isaiah 7. That Ahaz has a choice. He chooses to trust in this political alliance and not trust in God. And what Ahaz does is drags down the whole nation with him. And he drags them down in a way from which they will never recover. So now, fast forward several hundred years. You're in first century, what used to be known as Judah, now it's called Judea. It's the place the Jewish people live. It's their ancestral homeland. The Jews who are living there are subjected to Rome. Rome is the one that calls it. Rome is the next in a long line of people who have controlled that region. And for the Jews living in Judea, they are very well aware of the fact of why Rome is in control of their homeland. Go all the way back to Ahaz. Ahaz made this choice that we have now been living as subjects of, and we've been bearing the fruit of this miserable choice that he made. And that's why Rome is in charge. And so into this world where Jewish people in the first century are subjected to Roman authority and Roman rule, there is a young woman. Her name is Mary, and she's visited by an angel, which, by the way, angel means messenger. It's literally what the word means, messenger. A messenger from God comes to her and says, Mary, I know you're not married. I know you've never been with a man. You are going to become pregnant. God is going to do this work in you, and you are going to give birth to this baby boy, this son of God, who will rescue his people. Mary is willing to go along with it. Her fiance at the time, which in that world, being engaged was legally binding. In our world, if you listen to Beyonce, you got to put a ring on it. Nothing's official till you put a ring on it. In the ancient world, once you became engaged, you were legally bound to one another. So to break off an engagement wasn't as simple as, hey, I don't want to marry you anymore. To break off an engagement was a legal proceeding, a legal process. So when Joseph finds out that his young fiance is pregnant, he doesn't believe the whole, miraculous conception thing, which Joseph takes a bad rap, but which one of us would believe that? If your spouse or your daughter came home or something like that and was like, hey, I got some news to tell you, I'm pregnant. It's cool though. It's a miracle. It's God's baby. Most of us aren't gonna, we can bag on Joseph, but I got a little sympathy for Joseph. This is a hard thing to believe. And so Joseph, he's like, no, I don't want anything to do with that, because Joseph understands, one, people are gonna be able to do the math. They're gonna know that this baby was conceived before we got married. They may wonder if it's my baby at all. We're gonna raise this baby in a very honor shame culture that we're gonna be shamed for the rest of our life. This baby will be shamed for the I didn't sign up for that. I don't want any of that. That is this absolute mess. And so Joseph's plan is to legally divorce Mary. So here you have this little couple who they're in. I don't know what wedding planning was like in the ancient world, but wedding planning is an exciting time, right? It's hey, we're gonna get married. We're gonna start this new life. We're gonna have this new, everything's exciting. And for this poor couple, everything is now falling apart. It is just completely, these are good people who've done all the right things, done all the things they're supposed to. They're good, respectable, upstanding people. And then their lives just are falling apart. But then another angel, another messenger comes to Joseph. And this is what Matthew writes, Matthew 1, verse 20. But after Joseph, had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Notice what the angel says first. Joseph, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Joseph was afraid to take Mary as his wife. Not because he's afraid of Mary, but what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our future? What does that mean for our family? What does that mean for our child? This is just a messed up situation that I do not want to get involved in. I didn't do anything. I wasn't a part of it. This is a totally uncertain future. The angel says, don't be afraid. That God is actually up to something here. So marry her, stay with her, raise the child, and trust what God is up to. Joseph now has a choice. He's not forced. He's not obligated to listen to this messenger. He can do what he wants. Joseph chooses to stay with Mary. He marries her. They give birth to Jesus. Jesus is born. And so then Matthew says this, Matthew 1, 22 through 23. All of this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Immanuel, which means God with us. So Matthew quotes this verse from Isaiah that is incredibly well known to first century Jews because the verse that he quotes is their national failure. Where did we fall apart? Where did everything go wrong? Where did it truly unravel? Ahaz. Because Ahaz is faced with this choice that I can either trust what it is that God is up to, or I can trust in something else. Ahaz chooses to trust in something else, and everything falls apart. And what Matthew's saying is, hey, guess what, gang? We're back in that same spot. That we are in this really messed up world. Rome is in charge, and specifically if you zoom in, not even just the bigger picture, but if you zoom in on Joseph and Mary and even their situation, it is this really scary, uncertain situation. But into all of this uncertainty, what God is telling Mary, what he's telling Joseph is, hey, I'm up to something. I know it looks bad. I know it looks really weird. I know that you are scared. I know that you are scared of what this is going to mean for you and your life and your future, what it's going to do to your family socially. It's probably going to, I get all of that. But trust me that I'm up to something. Trust me that there's something happening here that's good. And now Joseph has that same choice that Ahaz had. Listen, I can either trust what God is up to, that God is telling me he's up to something. I can either trust that, or I can go with something else. And what Joseph does is the opposite of what Ahaz does. That Joseph chooses to trust what it is that God is up to, even though it's messy, it's not clean, it's gonna be a disaster, but somehow God is gonna do something. And whereas Ahaz's failure leads to the downfall of Judah, Joseph's trust is ultimately going to lead to the salvation of the world. And so what Matthew is doing is he's taking these two very pivotal events and he's saying, listen, we're back to this really monumental place again. That if you look at what happened in Ahaz, because if you look at the Isaiah story, the baby that Isaiah is talking about is just a baby. It's just a baby. The baby that is happening in Mary and Joseph's, this is not just a baby. This is God in the flesh. This is the Messiah. But what Matthew's saying is, this is very much like this, that we're in this same place. We're in the same place of fear and of uncertainty, and God is up to something. And in the past, where we didn't listen and everything fell apart, now we have the opportunity to trust. And ultimately, God will rescue us. God will rescue Mary and Joseph from the mess that they're in. God will rescue his people from the mess that they're in. God will rescue the world from the mess that it is in. And so by quoting Isaiah, this is what Matthew is wanting his audience to have, this very emotional reaction. To put them in the place of, hey, we're back there again. But this time, we have the chance to do it right. This time we have the chance to actually trust. This time we have the chance to do what Joseph did and what Ahaz could not do. And that was in the midst of chaos, in the midst of a mess, in the midst of all of this disaster, we have the opportunity to trust that God is actually going to deliver and rescue us. And at the heart of it is this baby, Immanuel, which literally means God is with us. This is really what Christmas is all about. Christmas is about that God is with us and that he enters into the mess of our world and the mess of our lives. That's why I put that wild nativity scene up at the beginning. Because if we were honest and we went around the room and you had to describe your family situation, is it more like that peaceful first nativity or the second nativity where the dinosaur's devouring everything? If we were honest, most of ourselves would probably say, we have our moments where we're like the first one, but honestly, it's a bit more like the second one. But the idea of God with us is that God enters into the midst of the doubt and the frustration and the chaos and the fear and the uncertainty. Now, what it doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be easy. It doesn't mean that I'm right and someone else is wrong. But what it means is in the midst of whatever you and I are going through, in the same way that it was with Ahaz, in the same way that it was with Mary and Joseph, that God, by his own choice, he's not obligated to. There's nothing in the manual of here's what it means to be God that says, hey, you have to enter into the very creation that you made. By the way, it's the creation that your own image bearer screwed up. You have to go there. It's not a requirement. It's a choice that God makes, that I am going to enter into the chaos. I'm going to enter into the uncertainty. I'm going to enter into the fear as a flesh and blood human being. I'm going to be there with my people and I'm going to rescue them. This is what we celebrate when we celebrate Christmas. That God enters into the chaos of your life and of my life, not just Mary and Joseph's life, but your life and my life. And the reality is you and I have the exact same choice that Ahaz had, and we have the exact same choice that Joseph had. In the midst of the chaos of our lives and of our world, we can choose to believe that God is up to something, because this is what Jesus says all throughout the rest of his life, all throughout the Gospels. It's what the writers of what we call the epistles, the letters that make up the rest of the New Testament, what they keep saying, that through Jesus, God is making all things new. Through Jesus, God is reconciling us. Jesus will tell this parable about how there's weeds in the world, but in the midst of the weeds, there's wheat. And he'll say, this is the kingdom of God, that God's kingdom is coming to life right here in the midst of the brokenness and the fear and the shame and the hurt of this world. And so you and I have this choice where we can take the Ahaz route and we can trust in something else. Like Ahaz did, we can trust in politics to make everything right. We can trust in money. We can trust in ourselves. We can just give in to cynicism and despair. Or we can choose to trust that God actually is up to something in my life and in your life and in your family and in the world. Even if you and I can't see it, even if we can't feel it, even if we're so afraid that we're shaking. We can choose to believe and we can choose to trust. And see, at its core, what Immanuel really means, what God with us really means, is that God is not a distant, unknowable being, but he's personable and approachable. When you look at survey data, like people in our country, people in the US, when they're asked, do you believe in God? Most people believe in God. But even most people who say they believe in God, and even most people who would identify as Christian in a survey, they live as practical atheists. And what that means is, I say I believe in God, but it doesn't make any difference in my life. Maybe it's like fire insurance. So when the bottom falls out, I get to go to heaven no matter what happens. But in terms of how I live my life, it doesn't make any difference. When you look statistically at, like, people will do these studies on like morality, the morality behaviors of those inside the church and those outside the church are virtually identical in just about every category. Because again, we tend to live as practical atheists, even if we claim we believe in God. We believe in God, but it doesn't make any difference in how we actually live. And this is where I think we need to recover this idea of Immanuel. Because what Immanuel means is that God is not some distant, far off, unknowable God that is unconcerned about your life and my life and what's happening in the world. It means that God cares about you and me and his creation so much that out of his own choice, rooted in his own love, he chose to come here, to be a human, to enter into our world, to enter into our existence, the world that we created, in order to be with us and rescue us. I love what Paul writes to the church in Galatia. Galatians 5:25, he says this. He says, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. The Spirit that he's referring to is actually the presence of Jesus. Jesus says after his death, burial, resurrection, and then ascension, where he ascends up into heaven, he says, I am going to send my presence to live within you. That literally the presence of Jesus, the presence that was born into the world that first Christmas, the presence that died on the cross, the presence that resurrected, that walked out of the tomb, the presence that ascended into heaven as the true and rightful king. Jesus says, I'm sending that presence to live within you. And what defines the church in the New Testament is the church is the community in which the presence of Jesus lives. Faith is not transactional. It's not, God did something, he checked his box, I then choose to believe, I checked my box, and now we're all good. Faith is a dynamic interaction between us and Immanuel, the God who is with us. See, a lot of times we define Christian as a Christian as someone who believes A, B, and C. That's a terrible way to define a Christian, by the way. This is a better way to define it, I think. A Christian is someone who continually lives their life in response to what God has done and is continuing to do through Jesus. This is what it really means to be a Christian. It's this dynamic interaction with a living, knowable, personable God. Doesn't mean that God always makes sense. Doesn't mean that God does what I want him to do. Doesn't mean that I get God on my terms. But it means that the God of the universe wants to know you and I, wants us to know him, has revealed himself to us in and through Jesus and in and through the ongoing work of his presence in our life. And so what it means to be a Christian is, yes, to live in response to what God has done in and through Jesus, specifically his death and his resurrection and his ascension. But what it is that Jesus is continuing to do in your life, in my life, in Southeast, in the community in which we live. Because he is still God with us. He's still God among us. Now, I have a friend named Carl Toney. He's a New Testament professor. He wrote a great book, by the way. It's called Ruining Christmas, Rediscovering Jesus. If you want literally a good scholarly account of the actual Christmas story, and this is a great little book. But one of the things he says is the phrase, like when you say the phrase, mom is home or dad is home, that can be good or bad depending on the circumstances. Right? Like depends on what's going on in the home that sometimes it's like, yay, mom and dad are home. It's good. They've been on the way for a long time and they're back and we want to run out and embrace them. Sometimes the house is a mess. You've destroyed everything. Everything's a disaster. It's like, mom and dad are home and we're in big trouble. The idea that God is with us should simultaneously be comforting and challenging. Because we're going to explore this a little bit more as we get into the next couple weeks of the series, but the announcement that's made is Jesus came to rescue us. He came to save us. That includes both justice and mercy. It includes forgiveness and confrontation. It includes love and truth. God among us is not God on our terms. It's not God the way we want him to be or the way that we think he should be. Immanuel is literally opening ourselves up to whatever it is that God is at work at in our lives, in our family, in our church, in our community, in our world. And what that means for all of us is change and growth and transformation. Yes, it means freedom. Yes, it means forgiveness. But it also always implies struggle and overcoming. Christian faith is not an easy thing because it's not a transactional checklist. It's this ongoing connection with a living God, the creator God. But as we begin this Christmas season, more than anything, here's what I want us to see. Here's what I want each of us to understand. God chose to live with us. He chose to live with you. He did not have to. He wasn't obligated to. He wasn't forced to. He chose to. The New Testament writers will talk over and over again about how we're chosen. And they don't mean like we're chosen and other people are not chosen. Like when you play kickball in elementary school. Saying, no, God chose you. Just as you are, for who you are. You are chosen. God came to live in, with, and among you in your situation. At Southeast, our mission is simply this. It's to make Jesus' presence known in our community and around the world. And that begins with us. How do we make Jesus' presence known in our life? Because here's what I'm going to tell you. No matter who you are, you read the Old Testament, read the New Testament. This is God's world, and he is at work in every corner of his world. Every corner. Most of the time, we just don't make space for it. We just don't allow ourselves to be aware of it because we get so busy, we get so focused on other things. We begin to trust and put our hope in other things. So as we begin this Christmas season, here's this challenge I'm going to leave you with. How can I make space for Jesus this Christmas? How can you as a person, how can you as a family, how can we as a church? Because this Christmas, for most people, is just filled with stuff. Office parties, family parties, shopping, decorating, wrapping, cooking, baking. And it's all good. None of it is bad. None of it is bad. But sometimes we get going so much that we neglect what really Christmas is all about. At the heart of it is Immanuel. God is with us. God is at work in your life, in my life, bringing healing and restoration and transformation and change. And you and I have the same choice that Ahaz and Joseph had. We choose which way we go. We choose how we respond. That's really what Immanuel is. Immanuel is an invitation. It's an invitation into life with a living, active God who is working to rescue all of us. And the heart of that rescue is the death and resurrection of Jesus, which is why we celebrate communion every week. Hopefully when you came in, you picked up communion. You don't have to celebrate communion with us if you don't want to, but if you want to, you can take that out. Communion is just two simple little things, a piece of bread and a little cup of juice. And it reminds us of the body and blood of Jesus that he gave, that he died for us. And we take communion every week as a reminder of what it is that God has done for us, that Immanuel, he came into the world and lived among us, and he gave his life for us. This is the means by which God is rescuing us. This is the means by which he's overcoming sin and death and making all things new. And so we stop to celebrate communion to give thanks for what God has done, to remind ourselves of God's great love for us, and to remind ourselves that he is Immanuel, God among us. So you can have a minute to you can peel back the top layer, take the bread, then peel back the next layer and take the juice. And you can have a moment of prayer reflection, and then I'll come up in a minute and close this all out in prayer. Father, we thank you for your love. We thank you that out of your love, you chose to enter into our world. 2,000 years ago, you did it in the person of Jesus. But you continue to engage our world through the presence of your Spirit alive within us. The New Testament says when we place our lives into you, you dwell within us. Immanuel, God within us, God among us. Father, during this brief moment, we just want to thank you for that. We want to thank you for coming in the person of Jesus, for living, for dying, for resurrecting, for overcoming sin and death, for offering forgiveness and grace and mercy, and for continuing to be with us in the midst of everything that we go through in our lives and our world. And God, this season, may we find time to not just say Immanuel, but to really appreciate it, to open ourselves up to what it is you're actually doing so we don't miss it, God. We don't want to be like Ahaz. We don't want to miss it. We want to be a part of what it is that you're doing and what you're up to in our lives and in our world. Father, we love you, we thank you, we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.